In tonight's Dorchester segment, we'll bring you up to date on some plans for the Fields Corner Library and a master plan for Franklin Park. And joining us is the news editor from the Dorchester Reporter, Jennifer Smith. Thank you very much for being with us, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Jennifer, I want to talk about Franklin Park. This is a large piece of green space, and there's a connection here to a large development in downtown Boston, so fill us in.
So everyone, I think, remembers the agreed upon sale of the Winthrop Street garage that was supposed to basically create a windfall for a bunch of other areas of the city. There was that back and forth over what the shadows would be on the Boston Common, but what ultimately happened is they agreed upon a sale price, and about $28 million is supposed to go to Franklin Park, which of course is this beautiful park that's right in the middle of the Dorchester, Roxbury, Roslindale area. And there's going to be a master plan to figure out what exactly to do with that $28 million. There have been improvements in recent years. About $7.5 million was dedicated to kind of improving the pathways and some of the landscaping, but the city has decided to kick off an initiative with a full community process to figure out what are areas where there should be more drainage? Should there be more access to specific areas of the park? Are there new buildings that should go up? Are there places that are in vast need of repair? Are there some areas that are just inaccessible? Should there be more programming? So there's kind of this very wide swath of proposals that the city's looking at right now and is going to start asking community folks to weigh in on in the coming year.
Now, I know this will take into consideration what people in the neighborhoods around the park want just now, but going behind this back, maybe more than a century, there is a sort of a master plan from Olmsted about having this sort of an unbroken, emerald necklace from downtown, Back Bay, the Fenway, Jamaica Plain, through Franklin Park, along Columbia Road. Is this going to be at play as well?
Yes, so this is all kind of part of it, this discussion around really connecting the emerald necklace, connecting the Columbia Road Greenway. These are all things that the city has kind of rolled out in pieces over the past few budgets in the past few priority areas, but it does look like they are trying to be addressing Franklin Park with an eye to that broader connectivity. Everyone knows when you live in the city, green space is kind of few and far between sometimes, and so to have this sort of connection, not just for those who want to be outside, but also people who might want to have an easier bike commute to work and have kind of a spacious place to do that and a green space to do that. There's not just the Franklin Park plan, but there's also examinations of what to do along Columbia Road. Are there areas where there can be better bike paths? Are there areas where they can just kind of up the amount of greenery? So it is actually kind of comforting to see the city and the Parks Department talking about transit in a way that actually incorporates green space.
Well, speaking of green spaces, they have one now in Mattapan that people didn't think of as a green space until fairly recently, and this is the part along the Neponset River. What's going to be happening with that?
So this is kind of exciting. There is, as everyone I hope remembers, they expanded the last leg of the Neponset River Greenway a little while ago. There's that beautiful bridge that crosses over the Neponset, connecting Milton and Mattapan. And now there's an effort, as Ryan Playground is going to be finally finished up, to actually see what you can kind of do along this greenway space and in the playground space. So a new organization of community activists that calls themselves Mattapan Love has decided to basically kick something off around June 16th in the Ryan Playground area and have a series of programs throughout the entire spring and summer. This could be live music, it could be arts, it could be fitness classes, basically trying to figure out how to best utilize this new green space that until now was kind of a construction site or just an unfinished leg of the greenway. So there are going to be a few meetings as the spring is coming up alongside of this to try and figure out what the planning process will be and figure out what the demand is for the specific programming. But it should again all start about midway through June.
Another thing that's coming up is a possible redevelopment of the Fields Corner Library. I remember back in the 1970s, I thought of this as a nice new building in Dorchester Avenue, a bit nicer than some of the buildings around it, but I guess there's some untapped potential for this space too.
Yeah. This is one of those stories that I really enjoy because it connects up this kind of city-wide way of looking at libraries differently and the way that we're looking at space differently. Of course, we're in the middle of a land crunch right now, so some of the most important assets that the city has are just physical property, and some of these areas also have libraries on them that are in line for these rehabilitation projects. So some of the ones that are coming up, for instance, are the new Upham's Corner Library, which is going to be slated for $18 million. The mayor just announced there's going to be a permanent Chinatown library. They're looking at a new Codman Square location. So in the context of all of these new projects coming forward, what the city is trying to do is figure out if standalone libraries are always the best idea. And this really kind of came to everyone's awareness around Fields Corner, where there's about a $12 million project to redo the Fields Corner branch, which, as you mentioned, hasn't really been done all that much with since the 70s. And so what they're looking at is not just expanding program space, they're considering maybe a 2-story library with changes like designated teen areas, clearer sight lines, working with the actual books themselves to figure out what's in the collection. But then on top of that, they're considering the possibility of mixed use on top of it, up to about 5 stories total, again at this corner location right in the middle of Fields Corner across from Town Field. And in a meeting last week where they were considering this option of mixed use, they floated a few different ideas that were met with some positive reception. One of them being maybe housing. Maybe this is a good space to consider affordable housing. Also, some folks floated a version of what they have at the Copley Library downtown, which is maybe an open radio space, a cafe of some sort, a community gathering area, or maybe a nonprofit space, since those are getting increasingly squeezed out by the same land costs that the rest of us are also dealing with. Or just some kind of other mixed-use community gathering area. But it's very, very interesting that the city right now is having those conversations about what do you do with libraries? Do they just have to be solely for the purpose of libraries?
The Stop and Shop strike is affecting stores all over New England, but I know there's one store in Dorchester that's going to be a center of attention later today, so maybe you can pick it up from there, Jen.
It's about 8 days in at this point, 7 or 8 days, and it doesn't really seem like there's an end immediately in sight over this dispute, specifically about contract workers, obviously, and arguments over pensions, pay, vacation, healthcare. The back and forth does continue. One of our reporters, Yukun Zhang, actually went out the other day to the 2 Stop and Shop locations that are in Dorchester. One is closer to Neponset, and one of them is in the South Bay at Stop and Shop. And they have been out there protesting, and they're going to have a little bit of support later this afternoon with former Vice President Joe Biden, Treasurer Deb Goldberg, Senator Ed Markey, and Mayor Marty Walsh are all expected to be out there in support of the union workers later this afternoon. Just another of this series of public officials that have been out there in support of it. Elizabeth Warren, if you recall, was also out there in Somerville asking people not to break the picket line.
By the way, any indication about whether people are honoring the strike? I mean, some people can go to another store, but for some other people, it might be pretty inconvenient.
Yeah, some of it is pretty inconvenient. From what our reporter saw, is there are some people that have been going in and out. Most people, when they come and see the picket lines and are kind of being told what's going on, they are leaving. There's been some good reporting over the last week that it does seem like it's having an impact on Stop and Shop's inventory. The Neponset store actually had to close down in the middle of a strike after about 45 workers walked off. You can't run a store with no workers, and you had to wait for temporary workers to come in. So it does seem to be having an impact on the company. And again, the very public condemnation of the Stop and Shop chain in support of the workers from all of these public officials, I think has kind of added to that amount of pressure on the corporation itself.
And finally, Jen, we should mention viewers can follow you and the Dorchester Reporter online. So what's the best way to find that?
Yeah, if you want to actually follow any of our stuff as it happens, you can find us at .news.com or pick up a physical paper. And then you can follow us on Twitter at .news or me at jen.smith.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Of course.
Jennifer Smith from the Dorchester Reporter.